Okay, thank you all for coming. I wanted to discuss with you literary theory again because I think it's very important to analyze literary text. Okay, what is literary theory? First of all, I want to say feel free to jump in whenever you want. If you have any question, anything you want to discuss or comment or elaborate, please feel free to interrupt. What is literary theory? Literary theory is different from literary criticism. If literary criticism is to evaluate the value of a text, theory is to analyze a text. What is the meaning of it? What does this text mean? How can I figure out its meaning? And there are multiple theories. There are actually more than 30 kind of theories. The ones I know are the ones that are included in this book are psychoanalytic, Marxist, feminist, new criticism, reader response, or what I call reception theory, structuralist, deconstructive, historical, and you get the idea, post-colonial, and all these things. There are so many theories, honestly. But today I want to focus on 4 of them. New criticism, structuralism, deconstruction, and reception theory. And I'm going to take them as much as I could in their historical order. First of all, back then, when people wanted to understand the meaning of a text, if I want to know what Shakespeare meant by this work of fiction, I would read about Shakespeare, about the history of Shakespeare and his life to understand his work. This is what the Romantics did. If they wanted to understand the meaning of the text, they would go straight to the history of the author and his life, because they think that the author and his life is the main source of the meaning behind the text. So they don't look at the text itself, but rather at the author. And that was a problem for the new critics, because this brought a multitude of different interpretations that are not scientific. And new criticism started in the 1920s to the 1950s. It was created by I.A. Richards and T.S. Eliot. These are some of the most important figures in new criticism. They call themselves the new criticism, but they're not actually new. They were trying to create a science of critique, as a science of literary study. They tried to make it as objective as possible, as logical, as scientific as possible. They even called it math. That's how they saw it. Ezra Pound, the famous poet, said poetry is a sort of inspired mathematics, which gives us equations for the human emotions. That's what he said. So to them, literature and literary studies are a form of science, and they can be analyzed objectively. So what did they do to analyze literary texts? They tried to find meaning within the text itself alone. They don't look at the social consequences, political consequences. They read the text and only the text. They don't care about the author intention. They don't care about the author history. They don't care about the time it was created and the environment or what happened at that time. All of that is unnecessary for the text. Whatever is important in the text is in the text. The meaning lies there. So they consider themselves to be objective in their analysis. And this way they were trying to elevate the text. It's not something that is subjective, always changing, unstable. No, to them they try to create a fixed meaning that is timeless, universal, and unchanging for all times and all places. Think about it as Islamic study of the Quran. Some of them say that the meaning is fixed, the meaning shouldn't change, and others say that no, the meaning is always there. It should never change. It could never change because these are the words of God, and therefore they have their one single meaning. So these are the new critics. Okay. How did they analyze the text? They looked at what they called the formal elements. That's their name for their analysis. Formal elements of the text, such as metaphors, similes, symbols, imagery. They analyzed these things. But they focused on 4 different things. They focused on paradox, irony, ambiguity, and tension. The way these guys use paradox and tension is different from everyone else. Tension is different now than it was back in New Critic Studies. Okay, what is a paradox? Does anyone have an idea what is a paradox in a literary text, in a movie? Okay, a paradox is a self-contradictory element in a story. A character says something and what happens is something else. But usually something opposite, huh? It's a paradox, contradictory. And usually the truth lies in what happens rather than what is said. So they try to emphasize a certain statement by creating a paradox. I don't have an example in my head right now, but maybe I'll get one later. And irony. They analyze literature through irony. What is irony? In a simple statement, it is a character action that leads to a different result, a result that is different from the one that you desired. For example, that's the one I gave you last time. The character Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones had always wanted to die on the Iron Throne and make a name for his families, but rather than dying on the throne, he dies sitting down on a toilet. That's ironic. It's kind of sarcastic. That's one example. If you have other examples, feel free to jump in. And ambiguity within the text. What is ambiguity? It is when a statement or an event or an action in the text or in a movie generates multiple meanings. They don't have one meaning. They can be seen differently and maybe contradictorily. For example, in Toni Morrison's Beloved, there's a scene where a character is whipped on his back, a slave is whipped on his back, and the more the master whips him, his scars becomes like a symbol of a tree. What does that signify? What does that mean? What do you think it means?
Well, the purpose of the whipping is to subdue and, humiliate somebody. But when the scars form a tree, it's like a symbol of life and freedom.
And a tree
That
also
inspires that feeling in the slave.
exactly, and the way I saw it, that's exactly what happened as well. I saw it that the more he was whipped, the stronger he got, because a tree represents strength, solidarity, and and life, like you said. So that's a bit of ambiguity within the text, and I'm pretty sure someone else could interpret that scene differently. Tension is really different for the new critics. It's not suspense, it's not thrilling or thriller. It's a juxtaposition, putting the opposite things next to each other. A rich man next to a poor man, or a poor guy in a very rich neighborhood. That's juxtaposition. It's done to emphasize how poor a certain character is, or how different these two characters are. Like in Game of Thrones, Jon Snow is wearing all black and black, and his hair is black, while Daenerys is wearing white. Her hair is blonde, and Jon Snow represents ice, Daenerys represents fires and dragon. So they are juxtaposed to emphasize how different they are. Okay? Conflicting views, putting two or linking two opposite ideas next to each other. Does anyone have any question before I move on? Hmm. Hmm. Okay, why do you think it failed? It's not practiced that much anymore.
I thought it seemed like something that we use every day. These terms that you're mentioning, it seems like the basis of literary analysis.
We do use them every day, you're correct, but we don't use them separately or alone. We usually use them along with other theories, such as historical theories, feminist theories, psychoanalytic theories. So, no, it's not practiced anymore. They're trying to revive it. New critics or new criticism is good for analyzing a small amount of literary text. So it's good for poetry, it's good for short stories, but it's bad at analyzing novels or longer forms of work. Because when you analyze a novel through a new critic lens, you will analyze the story scene by scene by scene by scene, and you can't bring forth the sum totality of that interpretation. The more you try to do it, the more contradictory your interpretation will get, or sometimes you will neglect other scenes.
It's sort of like you're missing the trees for the forest.
Exactly. You can't do it, So what did the new critics do? Since they try to be as objective as possible, it meant that the writing is the only truth, the only one single correct interpretation of the text. There can't be any more other correct interpretations. This has to be it. And that's where they were wrong, because when a new critic tries to analyze a text, he has to attack first the older interpretations before analyzing the text. He has to negate older interpretations before submitting his own. Why did it fall out of favor? It neglected the historical context. It neglected the social and the political role of literature. And there's no such thing as objective reading of the text. They also ignored the effect that language has on the reader. And we'll return to that later. Okay? So these are the new critics. After them, we have structuralism. I know it sounds complex and annoying. What is structuralism? But it's actually a lot more simple than you think. And I am talking about structuralism in regard to literature. They do apply structuralism to philosophy, religion, psychology, anthropology, history, but that's not the point I'm going to talk about. First of all, let's start with structure. What is a structure? It's an order, a form of order that forms the greater part, right? If that sounds complex. Structuralism look at the world in two things. There's the hidden world, the invisible one, and the visible one. The invisible world is a lot bigger than the visible one, and it's more important. And this world governs that one. That's how they see the world, in two binary opposites. So they try to analyze the hidden structure of a story and its relationship to all other kinds of literature. They don't look at a single book and analyze it. They analyze the book and its relationship or relation toward other works of literature, such as the Bible, the Greek mythology, fairy tales, and all of these things. Okay. I think it's better to give an example about structural analysis. And the best example I have is Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Has anyone heard about it? The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Joseph Campbell had studied mythology, and he thinks there's a universal element between all these stories, and that element governs all of them. What is that element? It is the hidden structure within the story. he came up with a formula called the hero's journey. It starts out like this. First of all, we have a hero living an ordinary life. Then comes a call to adventure, the call for something better, like Luke Skywalker. After that, he gets supernatural aid, like Obi-Wan Kenobi when he helped Luke at the start of Star Wars, or Jon Snow when he met his uncle in the first episode or second episode of Game of Thrones. And after that, the hero go through challenges and temptations. These challenges test his physical strength, mental abilities, and the temptations happen to be material temptations and female temptations. The hero has to go through these in order to complete his heroic journey. And at the middle, at the very center of the circle, the hero has to go through the abyss. And usually the abyss means death or rebirth or the hero's lowest point, the lowest point possible. Once he gets out of that abyss, he reaches a point of transformation and he changes into a different character, a better character that is stronger physically and mentally. And he atone for his sins here, and finally returns to his place.
It's a good thing to have a hero's journey in any fairy tale.
Yeah.
Don't you think it's a cliche?
It becomes a cliche by time. Once you notice it, it becomes annoying. But when you watch a movie such as Star Wars or Game of Thrones, without knowing what's going to happen, I think that's interesting. But once you become aware of it, and you see some elements in the story that are reflected in the hero's journey, then you can anticipate what's going to happen next. I honestly anticipated that Jon Snow was going to die because he was following the hero's journey.
I just want to know, how does this refer to the structuralism?
They study the hidden structure within stories. So Joseph Campbell was trying to say that this structure governs all heroic stories. So there's a skull. Let's think of it as a skeleton. It's the skeleton behind every story, and that's what governs it. And all that flesh, organs, skin is just a way to dress up the story. But actually, at their heart or at their skeletal figure, they're all the same. That's what Joseph Campbell was trying to say. Okay? Any questions so far?
Is it the structuralism, does it have origins in Greek mythology?
They have their origins in Greek mythology. Actually, Aristotle was the first philosopher that talked about literary theory in his book, The Poetics. And he analyzed how tragedy works, how it looks like, what is its form, and he wrote about it in his books. But there was a problem. You'll see it as we go on. Structuralism also fell out of favor because post-structuralists, or as they call them, deconstructionists, they thought that there was no meaning to stories. There was no meaning to structures. This structure does not exist in the story itself, but rather it exists in the reader's mind, and he imposes it on the story rather than extract it from the story. And actually, that's kind of true. Hey, that's kind of true. That's how we see the world. According to deconstructionists, and they were influenced by Jacques Derrida, a French philosopher, he said language is fluid, ambiguous, and unreliable tool of communication. There is no fixed meaning for words, no fixed meaning for language, so it's not a reliable tool. That was his point. If language is not reliable, if it doesn't have fixed meaning, then we don't have fixed identities either, because our understanding of our identity is also explained through language. Once you describe yourself, you're going to say, I am an Arab, I'm a Muslim, I am 30 years old, I am a male, and I am a teacher. But what does that really mean? Do you really fully understand what it means to be an Arab, or a man, or a male, or anything, or 30 years old? Does 30 has fixed meaning that is universal to everyone? Does everyone know what 30 is being like? That was their point. Language has no fixed meanings. It's not a reliable tool. It's fluid, ambiguous, and constantly changing. So they were attacking the structuralists and the new critics. Language has no fixed meaning. Honestly, actually, they were saying that language has no meaning at all, is meaningless.
So how do they communicate and write stories?
They say that meaning lies in the person that is talking rather than the language itself. So that's why most people, if you look at a conversation, you find that most people that are having conversation, it's not really a conversation. It's mostly like two guys misunderstanding each other's. It consists. Yeah, they're not fighting, huh? One guy is saying something, and the other guy is like, "Oh, you meant this? No, I meant that. So you mean this? No, I mean this." It's an endless cycle of clarification. Look at it, and you'll realize that, oh, this is actually happening. But why is it happening? Shouldn't our intentions be obvious in our language? Different background, different tools of understanding. We're not all well equipped to understand each other's. So it's harder than you think.
So did the deconstructionists sort of throw literary analysis in the garbage?
That's what they did. That's what they did.
There is no such thing.
There's no, not just literary theory. They threw even philosophy, even science, all of it. The structuralists understood the world in two binary oppositions. We understand what black is because it's not white. We understand what blue is because it's not red. We understand what good is because good is not evil. That's structuralist thinking. But the deconstructionist said there is no such thing as binary oppositions. What we think is objective is not really different from the subjective. That's what they said. They actually overlap. I'll give you an example. A historian is trying to write history. So he tried to write the most objective history, right? And he called objective science. History is objective science. But when he does, he picks and chooses the facts that he wants to show, the facts he doesn't want to show, the point of view he wants to focus on, and the point of views he misunderstood, and the ones he doesn't even know about. How can you call it history if it is subjective? It is that subjective. So to the deconstructionist, subjective and objective aren't that different. They overlap.
So do they have a way of approaching literary theory?
No.
Or is it, there is no?
There is no meaning. That is what they're trying to say. There is no meaning. Language isn't a reliable tool of writing. And that's their theory. Actually, deconstructionists look for the ambiguities in the text. That's what they want. They want, how can this text be interpreted differently? I'll give you an example. The writer Louise Tyson wrote in her book. I think it's a very good example. Okay? Let me show it to you. Okay. When I say the words, time flies like an arrow. Time flies like an arrow. What does that mean? It's very fast, huh? But when it pierces you, that's how Miriam understood. But when I say time flies like an arrow,
Time passes like an
no, no, I'll say it again, huh? Time flies like an arrow. No, it means time Time, or record the speed of flies like an arrow. Quickly record the speed of flies. Time flies like an arrow. Time, record, flies like an arrow, quickly. It could mean that, couldn't it? But you understood it, the time passes quickly, not because that's what the text meant, but because you understood the cultures behind the meaning of the text. So how can you say language is reliable? And I can do it again. Time flies like an arrow. It means time flies, like fireflies or butterflies, are fond of an arrow. Time flies like an arrow. Like an arrow. They love an arrow. You could read it that way as well. And they're all correct. And they're all correct reading. But you understood it as the first one, not because that the meaning is in the text, but rather the meaning is in you, yourself.
So the first meaning that comes in my mind is the right one, right?
It is the right one, but not because it is the right one, but because it is
I
the...
chose it to be right.
You chose it too, and it is culturally agreed upon. So it's not, the meaning isn't in the language. That's what they're trying to say.
So this is the deconstructionists, they sort of opened up literature to any interpretation, whereas before it was very specific.
Before they said it was unified, it was solid, it was stable, it was fixed, and timeless and universal. That's what they said.
That's the beauty of the language.
That's the beauty of the language,
They don't like it.
but they don't like it. Honestly, I think I'll get back to that idea at the very end, okay? And the deconstructionist says that in order to understand some words, you have to understand other words, and other words to understand other words. When I say car, what comes in your head is an image of a car, but you have to know what a car is, and in order to do that, you have to know what tires, wheels, its function, engines, trunk, and all these things to understand what a car is. All of these things results in a car. But in order to understand tires, you have to understand rubber, you have to understand wheel.
It's like when you try to explain internet to their children now. They know what is internet, but they don't know how did it come to be known as the internet.
And once you try to explain it, you'll end up in a chain of definitions that has no ending. So how can you say that language is fixed and it's clear and it's obvious? It's not, when it's not. That was their argument. Okay. So what they're trying to say is that literature contains dynamic, overlapping, and conflicting ideas. Therefore, it negates all other interpretations and make the text meaningless. That's their word, make it meaningless. But ironically, I think they showed you that literature or language has a lot more meaning, which makes them fresh, rich, and very fun to read and use. Okay. So far so good? Do you any need for clarification or anything? Okay. Now, deconstructionists had killed objectivity in reading. We ended up with what they call reception theory or reader response theory. Once you read a work of text, you are the writer yourself. How? When I say the woman was the most beautiful woman in all the world. Imagine the most beautiful woman ever. What comes in your mind maybe is a blonde woman, or maybe she has black hair, or maybe she's in her 30s, or at the end of her 20s, or in her teens. Maybe she looked like Kim Kardashian, maybe, or Angelina Jolie. I have no idea. But each one of you had a very different image of that woman. I am not responsible for that image. You're the one who created it. So you're the one who's responsible. So the meaning doesn't lie with me. It lies with you, your subjectivity, your memories. Once you read a literary text, your memories, your experience, your emotions, your thoughts, all play part in forming the text. So you're also writing the text as you read it. You're writing its meaning as you read it, according to your understanding. If you're someone who's interested into politics and you read a novel, you'll only find political interpretations. But because that's the tools you have in understanding anything. So of course you're going to produce subjective reading.
But in my opinion, I think the writer has some sense of responsibility because he can manipulate the reader's mind, the reader's thoughts. Because if I read a novel or a story and I get the wrong meaning of the whole idea, the writer has some responsibility of choosing the words.
He does, but once you read how many interpretations there are of Hamlet, it was interpreted in philosophical ways, psychological ways, feminist ways, and also historical ways. You have to stop and think, did Shakespeare really intend all these interpretations? We have no way of telling. He could have really intended all these interpretations, and he couldn't have. And honestly, that's the most logical interpretation. There's a good example. I have a good example. The writer, what was her name? Nafisi, a Persian writer called Azar Nafisi, I think. She wrote a book called Reading Lolita in Tehran. And she compared Humbert to Khomeini. That couldn't have been Nabokov's interpretation or intention. That couldn't have been, because Khomeini wasn't born at the time. But she read it that way because she read it through her experience, through her tools, her emotions, her thoughts, her memories, her ideology, and she interpreted the text through these filters. So what we end up with is completely subjective reading of the text. And once I tell you that Dostoevsky wrote a novel called The Brothers Karamazov, it has three characters. One of them is a theist, the other is an atheist, and the third one is passionate. If I quote a line from the atheist character, I quoted the line that God does not exist, and I write at the end, written by Dostoevsky. Would that be fine?
No.
Why not?
Because it's not him speaking as himself.
Because he's not speaking through his own tongue. He's speaking through a character's personality or a character's mask. So you can't attribute this thoughts or these emotions to Dostoevsky because they're not actually really his. So how am I going to understand the writer if he has so many multiple characters that have contradictory ideology? Correct? Okay. And this is where Roland Barthes came in. Roland Barthes came with a famous idea he called the death of the author. He said, the explanation of a work is always sought in the man or woman who produced it, as if it were always in the end, through the more or less transparent allegory of fiction, the voice of a single person, the author. What says here? It is language which speaks, not the author. To write is through a prerequisite impersonality to reach the point where only language acts, it performs, and not me, Malam, entire poetics consists in expressing. What he's saying, it's not that the author is the one who's writing and speaking, it is the language itself that is speaking, not the author. So in order for us to have a good reader, we have to kill the author. That's what he said. at the very end of his essay, The Death of the Author. By refusing to assign a secret and ultimate meaning to the text, we liberate what may be called an anti-theological activity, an activity that is truly revolutionary, since to refuse the fixed meaning is in the end to refuse God and his hypothesis, I said, and his reason, science, and law. So what he's trying to say, there is no fixed meaning to the text. The real author of the text is the reader. And he says at the very end, classic criticism has never paid attention to the reader. For it, the writer is the only person in literature. The birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. So in order to we could have good readers, we have to kill the author. It doesn't matter what the author intends. What matters is what I get from the text. And that's where we are right now in literary studies. And that's how feminist theories were born, psychoanalytic theories were born, Marxist, historical, and LGBT studies, and what else? What do we have? Post-colonial, African-American criticism, and all these things. They were born from subjective reading of the text. So as you can see, the history of literary theory went from complete objectivity to complete subjectivity in a matter of 2 centuries. And that's it. Does anyone have any comment or question?
About the last part, killing the writer brings good readers. Isn't it should be good thinker
Yeah.
instead of good reader? Because as someone's reading a book, just like, let's say he's having conversation with the writer. So if you're talking to me and I'm not even listening to your point, that's not a good reader. In this case, a good
Correct. But listening is different from reading. You could watch a movie without paying attention, but you can't read a book without paying attention. You have to focus while reading, otherwise you won't understand anything. The moment you lose your attention is the moment you lose all meaning in the text. So reading takes effort, and effort brings forth analysis.
The point of the book is thrown outside the window, and I brought my idea instead.
Hey.
You're ignoring the author's intention.
Yeah, intentions in the first place.
But it's their responsibility to execute that intention through the work, so that the work should exist in and of itself without you having to ask the author what they meant.
What you meant.
Like,
Yeah.
this is something that I heard somebody use this once when they were talking about Harry Potter and how J.K. Rowling decided to later that Dumbledore was gay. And this annoyed people who were like, pro-gay rights and people who were against it for a variety of reasons. But someone told me that, after you write the book, it doesn't belong to you anymore.
It belongs to the reader.
You can't come back and say this is what actually happened in this world that I didn't mention. It just exists now. Like you created something apart from yourself. So I think it's not about disregarding what's being said. It's focusing on what's being said and disregarding whoever said it. Like what has been created exists without the creator.
This world of Harry Potter is already, let's say, it's
Fixed.
existing. Yeah, it's fixed. It's there. But let's say the point of J.K. Rowling, I don't think the point was Dumbledore was gay or not. It was a wizard or...
No, Ali. It's a good example. You know why? Because in the books, it wasn't mentioned or suggested or hinted at that Dumbledore was homosexual. Not at all. She only said that recently.
Does she have that authority?
Does she have that authority? Once the book is done, it's done. It belongs to the reader.
I think the name still plays a role.
But it wasn't within the text.
Yeah.
We're studying text, not authors.
Well, we just had a writing club meeting.
I was just thinking about that.
He interpreted something that I wrote
differently.
And actually better than what I intended. Do I get to say that that's not what the poem says? If somebody read it in there, it exists.
He didn't mean.
I do have a point.
Yeah.
But if what I said can convey another point, it does.
But I already took that interpretation, Ali, huh? I already took that interpretation. She can't take it back.
It's like, think about this. If you see somebody and you say that they're beautiful, does somebody get to tell you that you can't think that? Exactly.
That's why this is a good thinker, not a good reader.
But what's the difference?
That's what we're saying. Critical readers.
Sorry.
I think like you're going more into psychoanalytical territory, which is very close to the author's intentions, and sometimes sort of dismantling their thinking process, which is also an interesting way of sort of theory of literature. But it's also invasive way of, especially if the author is still alive, to psychoanalyze the work can be a bit invasive.
But try to think about that we're analyzing characters. We're not analyzing authors. But that's not what happens. Once you read a novel, and the character in the novel talks about how closeted he is, you think, oh, the writer must be closeted as well. Oh, this is the author's confession. This is his mask. But that's wrong reading. That's not. Yeah, that's what I do of my own stuff. I read my work. Oh, there has to be a confession somewhere here. Hey, that's what I do even when I write my own stuff. What did I confess here subconsciously?
But also, because she had sort of invoked this idea of the writing part, we actually have the luxury of meeting the writers. Most readers don't.
Yeah.
So we can have a different interpretation than someone who reads our work and doesn't know us at all.
I read her work a while ago, and I honestly thought she was Christian and religious. But that's not true at all. But that's what I got from the text, and which is wrong. I shouldn't judge an author.
I have to die for you to appreciate the poem.
Yeah.
I can't read it and be like, that reflects this writer necessarily.
Send me a letter when you die. I'll submit to interpretation.
Question. Can we apply all these rules on plays, on movies, on poets, on these things?
Yes, on all things. Video games, movies, plays are all part of literature. And I think movies are more literature than novels.
Why?
Because the first, or one of the earliest forms of literature was plays. It was people acting and performing a story. So it was visual before it was literary.
It was the original.
That's how it looked originally. So what is a movie but a play with a camera?
So it's a play.
Almost.
A movie is a play. Right?
Almost. But a play is more intimate, of course.
I think every reader has a different way of reading things. Some people just look at the surface. Some people think deeper. So yeah, it really depends. I don't know. So, like some people that take things at surface value. Okay, this is what I'm reading. I don't want to go into depth about what exactly it means. I'm just going to enjoy it. Others try to see sort of connections in the text. How does this relate to this? I don't know. I think that sort of adds the richness of literary theory. That they allow that.
I do too, honestly. The more interpretations we have, the better. And there should be as many interpretations as there are people.
Because it's expand my thinking, expand how do I see things. It's all about what do I think.
We always like to use a good example of a movie, the movie Joker. Each and every one of us had a certain view of it, a certain interpretation of it. That is different from the own actor, from the different from the producer himself, from the one who made the whole movie. That's a good example.
And that's correct, and that's what should be. It doesn't belong to the director anymore. A work of art overlasts the director. Shakespeare is dead, but we still have his work, and we're still reading it, and we're still studying it. So his work is more important than he is. And what you get out of it is even more important. I think in a novel or a poem, you'll only find what you're looking for. If you're looking for something that is religious symbols or political ideologies in a work of art, and you're looking for them purposefully, you'll find them. You'll find them no matter what.
So I always see myself in any moment.
Yes, and that's what good art is. It reflects you back to you.
If you find something, if you don't find what you're looking for, you don't enjoy the work.
Exactly. You're not reading it, actually.
You're not reading.
But if you have no idea what Buddhism is, then you can't produce Buddhist philosophy out of a text. You have to have those tools to understand this text.
If you don't know about a topic, let's say, what do you know about kinds of foods or type of anything, you can't think much at that area of the authors or your ideas in that.
So you must have resources.
Yeah, you must know what it, just like the example you said about cars. You know what a car is, but you don't know
What goes in it?
Yeah, if you go deeper inside. What does that screw exactly do?
I watched the movie with my brother. I watched it 7 times. But when he watched it, he came up with a whole Marxist theory about the movie that I never noticed at all. And I'm like, you're an idiot. That is not in the movie. But the more he talked about it, I'm like, holy shit, how did I miss that? Like,
Is he younger than you?
he's younger, but he's interested in Karl Marx.
I think that's because he's younger.
He's younger, yeah. You don't understand anything. But when he explained it to me, I saw exactly what he meant. And I'm like, oh, this might be the correct interpretation of the movie. And you can't understand something if you don't have the concept that's going to help you. That's why feminist theories always focus on feminist studies of a literary text. And LGBT communities focus on LGBT interpretations of the text. African American focus on racial interpretation of the text, because that's their experience. Or these are their tools. So they are, of course, they're going to interpret it that way.
So it's interesting you mentioned about the responsibility of the writer to allow a certain interpretation to take place. I'm curious, why do you think that specifically?
Let's say because what I'm interested in how people receive the information they get, whatever they read, whatever they listen, whatever they hear. How do they understand those words? So the author, if he chooses the words
Correctly.
not correctly, he will just create a chaos. Because he means something, let's say it's good. And another whole idea will be born inside many people's head. And
Like me too with Hitler.
I'll have to explain something. Why is it called literary theory? Literary language is different from the scientific language. In a biology book, once you read about hand or an arm, a hand is just a hand. A horse in a biology book is just a horse. In a literary work, a horse has multiple meanings. It represents freedom, power, liberation, life, nature. Beauty. So literary language is different from the ordinary or the scientific language. It contains multiple meanings and multiple symbols.
Literal, the scientific.
Mm, literal studies, they're different. So in a biology book, you can't interpret it wrongly, but in a novel, you surely will.
How about translating the work? Does it affect the whole idea?
Of course it does. And even the ideology of the translator affects the work. Once we say hand in the Quran, does it mean God's literal hand? Does he has a physical human hand? Some people say yes. Some people say no. Say no, the language is figurative, it's metaphorical, and the hand means power, control, authority. That's what a hand is in literature. It's not just a hand.
I think there is a trick in religious texts. It is more dangerous to interpret and translate.
Yeah, you don't have that much leeway. But honestly, and that's what I wanted to say. Thank you for reminding me. Honestly, the more fluid the text is, the more interpretations we have. And in this way, ironically, the text becomes timeless because it is suitable for every time, place, and space. It's willing to adapt to new interpretations. It's fluid. It's flexible. It's not rigid. It's not rigid, and it could become outdated pretty fast. It's not fixed.
I think also every single person has a different relationship to the same language.
Yeah.
They don't have, like, for them, a certain word has different connotations as to someone else's experience. So you really, I don't know, it's almost impossible to really get at the truth of a text.
Objective reading.
It's impossible because you haven't lived that writer's life, so you don't know what each word means to them. And why they wrote it. So it's really, I don't know, it's almost like you're basically in outer space. You're reading a text because there's no definites really.
I read something once about language that, words don't really express ideas. Like, words are just pointers.
Vehicles.
They can point you at the idea, but they can never really express something completely. Like, if we say the word blue, it's going to point you at what blue means to us, but we might even have different ideas of what blue is. Like shade.
I have the thought of the sea when you said blue.
But the word is, that's not in the word blue. Blue is just, it's like a sign pointing you in the direction of the truth, but it's not, it can never really embody it.
I think blue is a good example because it reminded me of the ocean. In literary texts, water has many different meanings. It could mean life, it could also mean death, and it could also mean baptism. It's a symbol, and it could mean multiple things, depending on the context it lies in.
So is fire. So is fire.
Exactly.
Means life, means death.
So many things. It also means Yahweh, the burning bush. And so it means multiple things. But it depends on your understanding of that culture and your understanding of that society. How are you going to figure out it means Yahweh if you don't know what Judaism is?
I think also the writer's mind, not necessarily aware of these.
You can't be.
I can write something about water, but I have no idea what it means in literary theory.
Yeah.
But I just chose it as a metaphor for this specific word.
Sometimes it is subconscious.
It could be subconscious, but I think, the author is, they're not necessarily aware of how...
They're not as clever as we think they are.
But they might be doing it subconsciously.
Yeah, that's
Like they say that with dreams, they kind of represent sort of a shared human symbolism, that these same kind of ideas express themselves with similar symbols in all these different cultures, like through dreams, through myths, and it kind of suggests that on some level we just sort of share an understanding of what things represent.
I read a Japanese novel, and and there was a character that was compared to cherry blossoms. I never understood that comparison because I'm not that well informed about Japanese culture. But then when I looked it up, I realized that cherry blossoms in Japan represents temporality because they're only seen for 1 month at the end of March till mid-April or something like that. So they represent the death of something that is extremely beautiful, but that's not going to last long. I thought, wow, yeah, it's a good interpretation. But I couldn't have understood that without understanding the culture, because the author didn't expect a Kuwaiti guy to read his book. He couldn't have. So he just compared her to cherry blossoms, and expected a Japanese man to understand that.
I think choosing the words, it's because every person is just like he's a traveler with a suitcase. Wherever he goes, he just picks up information and puts it inside the suitcase. When he wants to express himself, he just puts inside his suitcase. What do you have? Let's say, how many words you can say about, say, sadness? You have, like, maybe I don't have many words. You have more. You have much more. So I would just maybe basic word sadness. You can be more creative. I think that's how it is. How people just go through things.
It's funny how I feel like as writers we get to we try to avoid things that are well known. We try to create something new.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's out of our hands. And I think it's funny that literary theory you're looking for commonalities, whereas we as writers are trying to create something completely different.
Completely unique, yeah. They're trying to say that stories are universal. And sometimes they are. Once you read mythology, you'll notice a lot of similarities between them. And you're like, what happened there? How did so many different societies create similar mythologies? And that's how they explain it. There's some universality to it. That's their interpretation. Naima. Hey. Best thank you guys. Thank you. If you're interested, I really would recommend these two books. Literary Theory by Terry Eagleton and Critical Theory by Lewis Tyson. This is more accessible than this one. Yes.